You're listening to The Alex Jones Show. Crashing through the lies and disinformation. It's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today in Austin on this Sunday, November 23rd, 2014. Now, we've had Obamacare, we've had Obama phones, and now we're going to have Obama law, it appears, because he's going to do more. He has already said, even before he made his executive order, his rule by fiat on illegal immigration, he said he was going to move ahead with climate change as well. And he didn't think that the Republican Congress, even with their majority, could stop him. Of course, what he really should have said is that they don't have the will to stop him. We're going to take a look at the true consequences of what he's done, and we're also going to look at the reactions to it from the GOP as they go on vacation and go home. They've had some in their number get on and make some kind of, I think, very weak suggestions. Sadly, even Pat Buchanan on the Sunday Show talked about how what Obama did is an impeachable act, and then he goes on to say, but we shouldn't impeach him. Why? Why would we not impeach a president for an impeachable act? Well, the only reason is because of politics, because of selfish gain. And that's the point that we've gotten to now. So we're going to take a look at what the GOP reaction is. We're going to take a look at the press. Even Saturday Night Live was mocking Obama. We're going to take a look at that. And then we want to get your reactions, your solutions. And the number on Sunday is a little bit different number. It's 877-789-2539. That's 877-789-ALEX. We're also going to check in with our InfoWars reporters in Ferguson. And, of course, in related aspects, there's been a couple of shootings over the weekend. One in I think it was in Ohio. It was a young man who was, Cleveland, Ohio. A young man, a 12-year-old, was shot because he had a BB gun in his hand. So we're going to take a look at that. That may not be an unjustified shooting, depending on how this came down. And at first, it looked like the police were going to stonewall people like they did in Ferguson, but then they came out with an explanation. But then there was something far more troubling that happened this weekend in New York. A man walking up stairways in a projects building that was being patrolled by the police. He was shot in the stairwell. They shot him in the chest, and he was killed. And now the police have very quickly come out and said it doesn't look like he was doing anything illegal. He didn't have any weapons. There was no reason for it. Coldly, the police did not even call for an ambulance there. They just left him there to die. But in related information this week, we had someone who was a whistleblower in the police department claiming that the police commissioner had essentially fudged the data on excessive force, essentially doing a Gruber. I think we need to take Jonathan Gruber's experience. I think we need to make a verb out of him. So we're going to take a look at that. And also in some news, we've got another secret order from Obama. We've got a story up on Infowars.com. Obama secretly extends U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan. He hasn't talked about that executive order, but that's going to have some big consequences. Something else being done in secret, of course, although it's been reported many times how those in upper echelons of power have been involved in pedophile rings in both the United States as well as in Britain. Now we see it yet again. And this is not the Savile case. This is another case where they shut down reporters. It was a pedophile ring of politicians. They said it was a matter of national security. That's also a story that's up on Infowars.com. We'll be talking about that. We also have a Texas representative who's introduced a bill to nullify all federal gun control regulations within the state of Texas if they conflict with the plain writing of the Second Amendment. That is the rightful way, I believe, for us to stand this down. I don't think we're going to find some Mr. Smith who's going to go to Washington and fix everything for us in a filibuster. I think the problem is too large, the power is too concentrated, the corruption is too great in Washington to really even be handled within Washington. I think anybody that goes into that black hole is essentially sucked into it. We're going to have to shut it down from the outside. Fortunately, there are constitutional remedies for it. It remains to be seen if the people and their elected representatives at the state and local level have the guts and the backbone to do something about it. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be right back, taking your calls.
Introducing Secret 12, the new InfoWars Life vitamin B12 formulation. Most forms of vitamin B12 are highly processed and synthetic and could not be properly absorbed by the body. That's why for real results, so many are having to turn to painful B12 injections, which are known to have higher absorption rates. Now, InfoWarsLife.com is excited to announce that we can bring you our most bioactive, powerful form of B12 that has been developed with our exclusive perfected process. Secret 12 is a binary of nutramedical grade, bioavailable coenzyme forms of B12, methylcobalamin, the same kind used in B12 injections, and adenosylcobalamin. Secret 12 is simply taken by mouth, right on the tongue, and then swallowed. No needles, no injections. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Discover the secret. Secret 12. Secure your revolutionary Secret 12 formula right now at InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.
You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from the Infowars.com studios, it's Alex Jones.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show on this Sunday, November 23rd, 2014. I'm David Knight, your host. We're going to be looking at Obama law today. We're going to look at the new way that business is going to be done, the consequences of it, both legally, economically, many different ways that what Obama did is going to ripple through our country. And there's a lot of reactions from it, both from the GOP as well as from the press, the public. We want to get your reactions and your solutions to it. But before we turn to that subject, I want to go over some of the breaking news today that's up on Infowars.com. We have Obama secretly extending U.S. combat operation in Afghanistan. He secretly signed an order. Oh. Is that different? Only thing different about that is that he's not talking about it, okay? He signed yet another executive order that's going to expand the United States' direct combat role in Afghanistan throughout 2015, reports the New York Times. You can read about that on Infowars.com. Now, understand that there was a lot of reaction to executives taking us into war, keeping us into wars. They pushed back against Reagan. They tried to limit his actions with the War Powers Act. And, of course, his response was to create Iran-Contra, to do other things like that. But they weren't successful in terms of getting control of the executive power to take us to war. So we don't have Congress involved in that anymore. The declaration of war, the involvement in war, should be something that is done deliberately with the people's elected representatives. That's why the legislature was given that responsibility by the founders of this country. Now, once, of course, you start doing that, once you're involved in a war, decisions need to be made quickly. That's why they put the executive in as the chief of that. But we need to take that decision very deliberately. That's why it's a legislative responsibility. In the same way, when you look at this immigration bill, and they first push back and say, well, this has been done before. It was done by Reagan. It was done by Bush. Those were not executive orders done in defiance and as an end run around the Congress. Those were implementations of the Congress's bill, the Simpson-Mazzoli Act. They basically referenced that bill when they made those executive actions. So in the same way that the Congress was deciding what the immigration policy was going to be then, and then the executive was implementing it with his attorney general, just like if it was a war that the Congress had constitutionally declared, it would be within the powers of the commander-in-chief to execute that using his staff. That was what happened under Reagan and Bush. That is not what is happening today. What is happening today is essentially as if the Congress had gotten together and said, do not go into this war, and Obama said, we're going to go anyway. I'm tired of waiting for you to declare war, so I'm going to do it on my own. And that is essentially what has happened. But again, I said before I was going to go into talking about that, I wanted to go over the breaking news here and some things that we will probably hit on later in the day. We're going to also be checking with our reporters in Ferguson who are on the ground. Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs are in Ferguson awaiting that verdict by the grand jury. And they're keeping an eye on the tensions that are building there. There's some other cases of excessive police force that have hit this weekend. We're also going to be looking at those. One in New York that is particularly egregious, although there the police department has gotten out in front of it very quickly and said it was not a justified shooting, apparently. The guy was not committing a crime. He was not armed. He was merely walking up a stairwell with his girlfriend, and he was shot in the chest with two cops that were walking down the stairwell. They did not even bother to call for medical help. The guy died, bled out there. And at the same time that shooting happened, we have someone who was an analyst with the New York City Police Department, actually looking at their data, looking at the report that the police commissioner filed, talking about excessive force, that very issue that is before us in Ferguson that is involved in this shooting of the man in the stairwell. In that report on excessive force in the city of New York, this analyst said that the data was fudged. They promptly fired him because he went public with this. He complained internally. They didn't do anything, so he went to his friends in the press, and rather than take the criticism, they fired him for it. So now he started a lawsuit, began a lawsuit this weekend. The issue of the police cooking the data in New York City has come up before. In the case of Adrian Schoolcraft, the whistleblower that has been talked about quite a lot, especially by Frank Serpico, calling him a lamplighter. That's his way he characterizes whistleblowers. I think that's a much better way to characterize them, actually. But in the case of Adrian Schoolcraft, what he saw as a dedicated police officer there, somebody who was an honest cop. His father had been a cop. He was very idealistic. He wasn't naive about what can happen in a police department, and that's what Frank Serpico said. He said, I didn't come into this naive about what really happens. I understand it's the real world. I understand there's good cops, there's bad cops. But in both cases, they believed that there was not such inherent systemic corruption. They believed that they could blow the whistle on bad practices and actually see something happen. In the case of Adrian Schoolcraft, for a couple of years, he recorded conversations secretly, essentially wore a mic on himself, recorded what he was being told to do because they were telling him and other officers to cover up violent crime because they didn't want that to show up in the statistics. They didn't want rape and car theft to show up. So when somebody would call the New York police, and it would be a car theft, for example, they would say, you know, you really don't want to get involved in this. You don't want to fill out all this paperwork. It's going to create a lot of trouble for you. They would make it look really difficult. Say, why don't we just change this report and say, once I got here, you forgot that you loaned this to your cousin, and the car really wasn't stolen. That's how they got their serious crime down. And at the same time, they were telling them to lean very heavily on people for violations that they could get fines for. Let's say having unswept hair on your barbershop floor. They could come down with you for a couple $100 fine there. So they were ramping that up. At the same time, they were talking down the serious crime. He blew the whistle on them. He tried to appeal to people within the system, and instead the number 2 guy went to his apartment and threatened him, said, we think you're looking kind of like you might take your life or something. So for your own protection, we're going to put you into custody. And they took him away. Actually, before they took him away, they discovered the wire. But he had a second recorder on the bookshelf. They took him away, took him to an insane asylum, and committed him for several days until his father found him. His father, the former police officer, found him. Anyway, this has been going on before where they're fudging the data. I guess we should start calling it they Grubered the data. You know, there was actually a piece that came out about Ebola just this last week. It was put out, I think it was by, who was this? Was this the Washington Post? Yes, Washington Post. Why your bathtub is actually far scarier than Ebola. Really? And in this, it's a perfect example of how they Grubered the data, how they twisted the statistics to get the kind of result that they want. And you know, I think we've had a lot of words that essentially began with one person's actions and then became a verb or a noun. We have boycott, we have shrapnel, we have crapper from the guy who, crapper was the guy who invented the toilet. We even have Lewinsky from Monica Lewinsky. I think what we ought to have is Grubering the data. I think we need to have a verb for that. They go through, and you can look at this chart. We'll pull this up here. This is from the Washington Post, why your bathtub is actually far scarier than Ebola. And they'll go through and they'll break down different things like firearm assault, they will break that down so that, or actually death by car, they break it down. A death by car, they have pedestrian struck by motor vehicle struck by a motorcycle struck by a motor vehicle, bicycle struck by a motor vehicle. They categorize this data down in different categories so that it looks like they're much smaller. And they want to move firearms to